Let's keep building this community that refuses to stop asking the hardest question of all. But why? Jeffrey Epstein was not just a wealthy financier. He was not just a man with private jets, island retreats, and connections that reached from Wall Street to the White House, from Buckingham Palace to Silicon Valley. Epstein was something far more dangerous. He was a collector of secrets, a manipulator of power, and a predator who thrived in silence. For years, the warnings were there. Survivors came forward, journalists uncovered patterns, investigators filed reports, and yet, time and time again, Epstein walked free, protected not by innocence, but by influence. Then, in 2019, when the walls finally closed in, the story ended in a way that only deepened the mystery. A prison cell, guards who claimed they fell asleep, security cameras that conveniently stopped working, an official ruling of suicide, and a public that was left with more questions than answers. They said it was over. But was it? Or was this the moment when the truth itself was buried? Because Epstein's death didn't just silence him, it protected others. People in high places, people whose names remain redacted, hidden behind sealed files and legal shields. And that is why, years later, the case still refuses to die. Tonight, here on Shadow Detective, we pull back the curtain on the story they want you to forget. We follow the evidence, the survivors, the failures of justice, and the shadows of power that stretched far beyond one man. This is not just about how Jeffrey Epstein lived. It's about how he died, and why that death may have been the final act of protection for a network much larger than him. Welcome to Shadow Detective, and welcome to the investigation. Before we dive any deeper into this case, let me pause for just a moment. Shadow Detective isn't just another true crime channel. It's a community that refuses to look away when justice is at stake. If you believe that truth matters, if you believe that every victim deserves a voice, then I'm asking you to stand with us. Subscribe now and become part of a movement that pushes back against silence. And while you're here, drop a comment telling us where you're watching from. Because justice has no borders. And together, no matter where we are, we make sure the world never forgets. Tonight, we turn our focus to one of the most infamous names in true crime, Jeffrey Epstein. His story is not just about a man, but about a system, a network, and a silence that continues to echo years after his death. Was justice served, or was it buried alongside him? To understand the shadows surrounding Epstein's name, we must go back to his rise. A man who seemed to appear from nowhere, with no college degree, no traditional credentials, yet somehow he stepped into the world of finance and influence with doors opening before him. His charm, his ability to present himself as indispensable, placed him close to those with wealth and power. And once those connections were made, Epstein never let them go. He built an empire not on transparency, but on secrecy. His wealth was a mystery. His lifestyle was extravagant, yet unexplained. The people who surrounded him ranged from world leaders to celebrities, from billionaires to royals. He wasn't just networking, he was weaving himself into a web that made him untouchable. But behind that image of glamour was something far darker. Whispers of exploitation, stories of young girls, recruited under the guise of opportunity, trapped in a cycle of abuse they could not escape. These stories circulated for years, yet they rarely reached the light of day. Why? Because Epstein's greatest skill was not financial investment. It was in buying silence. Silence from victims, silence from witnesses, and silence from a system that should have protected the vulnerable, but instead protected him. Jeffrey Epstein's story begins not in a boardroom, but in obscurity. Born into modest circumstances, he emerged with little more than ambition and an uncanny ability to navigate the corridors of power. How he amassed his wealth remains shrouded in mystery. Some say it was talent, others insist it was cunning. But what is undeniable is that he became indispensable to those at the highest echelons of finance, politics, and society. He mingled with presidents, princes, and billionaires, He appeared at private gatherings, where deals were whispered behind closed doors. Invitations followed him as if drawn by gravity itself. With each handshake, each connection, Epstein built an invisible shield, one that insulated him from scrutiny, from accountability, and from the law that governs ordinary men. And yet, behind the charm, behind the expensive suits and lavish islands, lay a darkness most feared to name. Rumors swirled, accusations surfaced, and warnings went unheeded. Who protected him? Who looked the other way, while the evidence stacked quietly in hidden files? How far did his reach extend, and who was complicit in keeping it intact? Epstein had learned the most dangerous lesson of all. Power is not just about influence, it is about immunity, and with each passing year, his immunity only grew stronger, leaving the vulnerable trapped in a system that refused to act. In 2008, the first cracks in Jeffrey Epstein's empire became visible, but instead of collapsing under the weight of justice, he emerged stronger than ever. Federal prosecutors in Florida had the evidence, the testimonies, and the victims. Under normal circumstances, these cases would have ended in lengthy prison sentences. But Epstein did not face ordinary circumstances. He struck a plea deal so unusually lenient that it shocked both legal experts and the public. Instead of facing federal prison for trafficking and abuse, he served just 13 months in a county jail, with generous work release privileges, and was granted immunity for potential co-conspirators. A deal that would have destroyed an ordinary man, instead built Epstein into something untouchable. His influence remained intact, his connections remained unquestioned, and the very system designed to protect the most vulnerable had failed spectacularly. The question remains, why was he allowed to walk so easily? Was it his wealth, his influence, or something more hidden, something that left powerful figures silent, while victims were left unheard? This was not merely a legal misstep. It was the foundation of a network shielded by privilege, secrecy, and a society willing to turn away from the truth. In July 2019, Jeffrey Epstein's carefully constructed world finally began to crumble. Federal authorities charged him with sex trafficking of minors, opening the door to the horrifying scale of his crimes. The evidence was extensive: flight logs, financial records, and survivor testimonies that revealed patterns of manipulation and abuse spanning decades. Public outrage erupted. The world could no longer ignore the allegations that had been whispered for years. For survivors, this arrest offered a glimmer of justice, long overdue, painfully delayed. And for the powerful individuals who had associated with Epstein, the spotlight became uncomfortable, unrelenting, and in some cases damning. While it is important to report only verified facts, Epstein's connections to prominent figures, politicians, businessmen, and royalty added layers of intrigue and suspicion. Names appeared in flight logs, invitations, and social circles, though association is not proof of complicity. Still, the network surrounding him became impossible to ignore. When his world collapsed in 2019, the spotlight didn't just shine on Epstein, it cast long shadows on those around him. And in those shadows, we find names, secrets, and questions no one wants answered. Questions that continue to demand attention, long after the man himself is gone. In August 2019, the world was stunned by the news. Jeffrey Epstein, the man who had evaded justice for so long, was dead in his Manhattan jail cell. Officially, the cause was ruled a suicide by hanging. The headlines moved quickly, the news cycle rushed past, and many were left with a fleeting sense of closure. But for those who looked closer, the story was far from simple. Critical details raised immediate concerns. Guards, entrusted with the most high-profile inmate in the nation, were asleep or claimed to be during the hours when he died. Surveillance cameras that were meant to monitor the cell failed at the most crucial moment. Procedures designed to prevent exactly this kind of tragedy had been ignored, overlooked, or broken. Each anomaly deepened the suspicion that this was not just a failure, it was a collapse of the system itself. Questions flooded in, and none were easily answered. How could a man under constant federal custody vanish into death without a trace of intervention? How could a network that had allowed him to evade justice for so long still operate in plain sight, even after his arrest? Was Epstein silenced, or did a broken system simply fail once again? Was it negligence, incompetence, or something more deliberate? For investigators, the line between accident and conspiracy has never been more blurred. And for the public, the unanswered questions are stark and uncomfortable. Who benefited most from his death? Which powerful names were spared scrutiny? And how many secrets were buried alongside him? In that cell, behind locked doors and blind cameras, a reckoning should have begun. Instead, it ended in shadows, leaving the world to wonder what the truth truly was, and whether it will ever be revealed. In the wake of Epstein's death, a torrent of theories emerged, each darker than the last. Some claim he didn't take his own life. Some point to powerful enemies with motives strong enough to silence a man who knew too much. Others insist he had information, names, connections, secrets that could topple reputations and shake governments. Yet for all the speculation, it is crucial to remember, suspicion is not proof, and conjecture is not evidence. Still, the circumstances surrounding his death, combined with the vast network he had cultivated, cannot be ignored. The patterns of power surrounding Epstein demand scrutiny, not dismissal. Flight logs, guest lists, and private records point to an intricate web of elite figures. Politicians, businessmen, royalty, names that appear repeatedly in proximity to Epstein. Association does not equal guilt, but it does raise questions. Questions about influence, protection, and the invisible forces that may have allowed him to evade justice for so long. Every unanswered question becomes a shadow, stretching further than one man's life or death. And in those shadows, we are compelled to ask, how deep does this network truly go? And who will ever be held accountable for what it concealed? In July 2020, the focus shifted to Ghislaine Maxwell, Epstein's longtime associate, who had long been accused of recruiting and grooming victims for his network. After years of evading justice, Maxwell was arrested, charged, and ultimately convicted for her role in the abuse. Her trial brought survivors' voices to the forefront, revealing the manipulation, fear, and suffering that Epstein's operation had inflicted. For many, this was a moment of accountability, a rare victory in a case where so much had been ignored for decades. Yet even as Maxwell faced the consequences of her actions, a critical question remained unanswered: the identities of those who allegedly benefited from Epstein's network. Client lists, financial records, and other documents remain sealed or heavily redacted. Names that could implicate influential figures are hidden from public view, leaving gaps in the story and shadows in the truth. Justice in this case is incomplete. Maxwell's conviction cannot erase the broader system that enabled Epstein to operate, nor can it fully comfort the survivors who continue to wait for answers. The case reminds us that while individuals may be held accountable, networks of power often remain untouchable, and the silence of the elite continues to protect those who wield influence. Jeffrey Epstein may be gone, but the shadow he cast remains. His death did not erase the questions, the victims, or the network he left behind. The truth is still buried, hidden beneath layers of power, privilege, and secrecy that refuse to be disturbed. The story of Epstein is not just a tale of one man's crimes. It is a story of systems that failed, of institutions that turned a blind eye, and of a society that allowed the vulnerable to be exploited while the powerful remained untouchable. For the survivors, the fight for recognition and justice continues. For investigators, the task of untangling the web of connections is ongoing. And for the rest of the world, Epstein's case serves as a chilling reminder: when influence and secrecy collide, even the truth can be endangered. Here on Shadow Detective, we do not stop at headlines. We follow the trails that others ignore. We ask the questions no one else will, and we shine light into the shadows, because justice cannot exist where silence prevails. The Epstein case may be closed on paper, but the story is far from over. The victims still wait. The questions remain, and the shadows continue to stretch across a world that once turned away. If you seek the truth, join us, because the world owes it to those silenced to never look away. You believe that truth should never be buried. If you stand with the survivors whose voices were silenced for far too long, and if you refuse to let wealth, power, and privilege dictate who faces justice, then this is your call to action. Subscribe to Shadow Detective and become part of a community that asks the questions others are too afraid to ask. Share this story, not just as a tale of one man, but as a reminder that systems fail, that networks of power can shield the guilty, and that silence is often the weapon of those who should be held accountable. Each view, each discussion, and each moment spent confronting the uncomfortable truths brings us closer to shining light into the shadows. Because Epstein may be gone, but the questions remain. The victims are still waiting for answers, and the world owes it to them, not just to remember, but to demand that no one else is allowed to disappear into silence. The work does not end with this video. The investigation continues, and so must we. If you refuse to look away, if you demand justice beyond headlines and official statements, then join us. Subscribe, share, speak, and never stop following the trail of truth.